Hello, mobility athletes. Welcome back. We have our very first military guest, and I am so excited. We have retired Master Chief Will Wilson, and he entered the Navy at age 17 and really traveled. He's been a distinguished 32-year Navy veteran and an explosive firearms specialist, and continues to motivate true leaders all over the world. Master Chief is very unique in the fact that he holds qualifications as a certified personal trainer through the highly rated Cooper Institute in Dallas, Texas, an instructor for the President's Council on Physical Fitness, and is a certified open water scuba diver. Master Chief is a graduate of Exercise Science College in New York and served as the Navy's first head coach and program manager for the Navy Wounded Warrior Safe Harbor Adaptive Athletics Program. And one of those things is that he's going to share with us today. He is also an adaptive athlete. So welcome, Will. I'm so excited to have you on board and to jump in. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, as you said, I joined the Navy at 17. I lived out in California at the time. That's where I grew up. It was a great place to grow up in the 70s. Beach, dune buggies, everything you wanted, it was out there. And, I reached the age of 17, and my brother and brother-in-law had both been in Vietnam. And, they go, what are you going to do? I said, what do you mean? What am I going to do? I said, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? I said, I don't know. And they go, do you want to go talk to a recruiter? I said, what's that? He goes, well, it's a guy you talk to about going in the Navy. I said, yeah, okay. 2 days later, I was in San Diego in boot camp and rocking and rolling. And, I never would have thought in a million years that I would have made a career out of it at the time. I came in with hair down to the middle of my back. I was a surfer in Southern California. And, I'll never forget sitting there in the barber's chair, and the barber, he takes his shears and goes right down the center of my head. So I had two big poofs of hair out to the side, and he walks me out. I was the first one. So he walks me out in front of, like 1,000 guys and says, okay, guys, this is what you have to look forward to. Then he took me back in and did another one this way. So I had a patch here, 4 big patches of hair. And he was having a great time with it. And, it was just the start of something that really took my interest as time went on, and I stayed with it. And, I'm glad I did. Serving our nation was one of the greatest honors I've ever had.
And you moved up. So Master Chief is the highest rank in the Navy, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. So tell me about what it was like to develop. So you went from a long-haired surfer to one of the highest ranks in the Navy. What was it like developing those leadership skills along the way? That takes a lot of development.
Well, I did it in my own way. And, as you progress in the military ranks, you're exposed to a lot of different leadership styles. So, you may work for one guy or gal that you really respect and say, man, if I ever get to that position, I'm going to be just like them. And then, the next tour, you're with this person that you're like, really, I'd rather pull all my teeth with pliers than go into work with them and say, I will never do what they did, and you just, you glean the good things from the good leaders. You kind of hip pocket the bad things that you don't want to emulate, and you carry on and develop your own leadership style. And the thing that carried me the furthest is just realizing that, yeah, you're in the military, but, you're surrounded by human beings. Treat your guys and gals like human beings, pat them on the head when they need that pat on the head, boot them in the butt when they need that as well. Treat them like human beings, and they will walk through flames for you.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I've read a lot of books regarding military structure, because when you look at business structure, and it's so interesting, you can't get people to show up to work at 8 o'clock on time, but the military can get people to walk into battle and risk their lives. And
Right.
So there's a lot of things about like, what is it that leaders in the military have? What is the structure of the system? Can you talk a little bit about the types of things that you think make the military so successful in leadership, and how just everyday individuals can start incorporating those basic things in their life to really move forward? I know there's a lot of consistent habits that happen in the military.
Well, the biggest thing is structure. You know, if you develop a structured system that your men and women can follow, we had what we called the plan of the day. It was issued each day, printed on a piece of paper. It went for hour by hour, exactly what your duties and responsibilities were throughout the squadron or unit, or, you know, whatever command you were attached to. And if you structure yourself, and if you have the personal and internal fortitude to discipline yourself to maintain a structured you know, outlook on life, then you'll succeed. It's those that wake up and say, oh gosh, you know, I gotta, you know, they go in to brush their teeth and they're combing their hair with their toothbrush and they're brushing their hair with their, you know, whatever. And it's just haphazard. They have no structure. And if you plan things out in advance, say, okay, you know, I'm going to get up every day at, you know, 500, 0600. I'm going to go for a run, go for a walk, you know, clean the yard, do whatever. You know, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock is this, you know, 9 to 10 is this. If you try and maintain that structure, it becomes a lot more self-evident that you can maintain a system of values along the way. But you've got to have that external structure.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, and I'm sure you see that a lot in the military too, we try to fight structure. It's like we want to live these like own unique lives, which you can, but it still has to be overlaid with some sort of structure or semblance. Our bodies and our minds love homeostasis. They love structure, and you can really find yourself wasting a lot of time. Your leadership changed significantly. Your role in the military changed significantly in 2001 when you had a major injury. So tell us about 2001 and what happened.
Well, at the time, I was the ordnance master chief. Ordnance is anything that goes boom or bang, and bombs, rockets, missiles, that type of thing. So I was the ordnance master chief for an air wing of squadrons going aboard an aircraft carrier. And the USS Enterprise had just come out of a major repair period in the yards in Norfolk, Virginia, and she was getting ready to go out for sea trials. Well, anytime a carrier exits a port since the bombing of the USS Cole, it has to be escorted by 2 armed helicopters to fly up and down the channel to execute what they call channel guard, to you know, protect the ship against small boat attack. Well, it was my responsibility as the Ordnance Master Chief to pre-position ammunition on board the USS Enterprise. And, you know, there it was, one of our older ships, the first nuclear aircraft carrier in the Navy, doing or getting ready for our last cruise. I was one of 3 air wing personnel, went over to make sure our ammunition was pre-positioned and everything was good to go. Well, as things would have it, it was one of those days that nothing was as it should be. The ammunition wasn't there. You know, they weren't prepared. Our helos were late, this and that. And at the end of the day, it really got rough. About 5 o'clock in the afternoon, after being there since 5 a.m., I looked out of the island, which is a big superstructure on the aircraft carrier flight deck, and saw these huge, ominous storm clouds moving in off Chesapeake Bay. And the storm moved in so quickly that they didn't have time to put what they call heavy weather tie downs on the aircraft carrier, these big, you know, 12-inch in circumference ropes to hold the carrier secure to the pier. And so as I go across the flight deck and I'm exiting the ship across the brow, the gangplank, if you will, the wind was so intense that it pushed the aircraft carrier away from the pier, and the gangplank sits on about a 25-foot platform on the pier with stairs descending down both sides. And I had almost gotten to the end of it when these huge gusts of wind were hitting the carrier, and it pushed her further and further away from the pier. Well, that gangplank rolled further and further back on that platform on the pier until it caught one corner, and it was kind of teetering like this, and it opened up into a pie shape. And I'm looking down about 25 feet, and I'm going, well, this is not going to end well. So I had to make that split decision. Am I going to ride this down to the concrete pier, or am I going to try and jump? So the platform on the pier, it was made of steel grating, and I figured if I jumped across that void and got my fingers in that steel grating, I could hang on. But then I thought, well, gosh, if I'm hanging on there, my legs are going to go down into this void. If the ship surges back, the edge of that brow, the steel brow, is going to cut me in half. So I'm like, oh, dude, this is not going to end well at all. And so, this is all running through my mind, as things do in a split second. So I decided, well, I'm going to go ahead and jump. Just as I tensed up to jump, another gust of wind came, and the entire brow separated from the ship and dropped me 25 feet to the concrete pier below. And the impact broke both my legs and my neck. And I'm laying there in this horrendous rainstorm, and I'm hurting, of course, but I'm laying there, and I hear the announcing system on the flight deck 90 feet above says, man down on the pier. And me being me, I roll over on my side to see who it is, and yeah, it's me.
Oh my gosh, that's a crazy story. And again, just talks to you as a leader that you roll over to see who you need to help, and you're the one that needs it.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those days,
So then obviously taken to the hospital, and what led, so are you an above the knee amputation or a below the knee?
I'm below the knee on the right side.
Okay, below the knee. So what led to that? Was it just the sequela of all the injuries?
It was, laying in the trauma unit in Norfolk. I remember the trauma surgeon walking in, and they had me on a gurney in a trauma bay, but they had this big sheet hanging down from the overhead about hip level, so I couldn't see my legs. And I'm like, well, this is kind of strange. And the trauma surgeon walks in and says, okay, Master Chief, I've got 2 questions for you. I'm like, okay. At that time, they had me all narked up and, painkillers out the wazoo, and I'm in and out. So he goes, well, number 1, do you want to stay in the Navy? And number 2, do you want me to take your leg right now? I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Yes, I want to stay in the Navy. I've already got, at that time I had 26 years in already. And I go, what do you mean take my leg? He goes, well, your left leg is broken just below the knee. It's a closed fracture. You're good to go. It's going to heal up. You're going to be just fine. Your right leg, your heel bone is broken into 6 different pieces. You got several different other fractures. Your leg is pretty mangled. You've got 2 choices, essentially. I can try and put it back together, and you may eventually end up losing it anyway, or I can go ahead and take it off right now. So I'm like, well, hell, I'd never even heard about amputees or what they do or what they could do. So I said, well, put me back together. And, they started to do so. And I went that way for 3 years, from 2000, or essentially 4 years, from 2003 to 2007. And, they call it limb salvage. And each doctor would present their case and say, okay, with this procedure, I think I can make you better. I think I can eliminate the pain, give you more mobility, so on and so on. I'm like, okay, well, about 10 or 12 of those surgeries later, I'm like, dude, this is not working. And so I started, looking online about, what are my options? And then I found the Paralympics and, all these athletes doing these tremendous things. And I look at it and I said, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. So I started soliciting them to amputate my limb. And I actually had to talk the Navy in to amputating that residual limb because, for the physicians, it was still viable tissue. So I'm like, dude, just take it off. And it was the best thing I ever did.
Wow. I mean, there obviously, especially, in recent years, there's a lot more amputees in the military, or that leave the military due to amputee injuries. What was that like? Did you go back to the Navy after that? Did you retire from the Navy? What was that kind of like during this time, seeing that role? I mean, obviously to rise into your leadership position, you showed so much physical and mental strength. What was it like to watch your body kind of change in that way? What kinds of things did you really have to tap into to stay at the top of your game mentally and as a leader?
Well, that's where it really got difficult, and the leadership aspect and the consistency of life really kicked in. And I knew that I chose amputation, so I was ready for it. And I was in fantastic shape. I went to the gym every day, lifted. The only thing I couldn't do is run. So I swam a mile every day, lifted heavy, and so I was in excellent condition when I went into amputation. Unlike these unfortunate 18, 19, 20-year-old young men and women that one day they're Superman, a bulletproof, kicking down doors in bad guy land, and the next day they wake up in a military hospital and they look down and, oh, wow, my legs are gone. Where are my arms? They don't have time to process that, where I did. So I was able to compartmentalize everything. And probably the most difficult aspect of it is I actually looked up, it's called a transtibial amputation. So here I am at work and I'm typing away and looking up transtibial amputation to see if there was anything on YouTube or anything on a medical journal. And believe it or not, I found this channel that showed the actual procedure taking place. I mean, they rolled the guy in. I'm in the entire thing. I'm like, whoa, dude. And so I watched it and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is what it's all about. And I called my wife and I'm like, okay, go on the computer and bring this up. I want us to watch this together. She's like, what is it? I'm like, just do it. And of course, she's just heartbroken and crying. And that was probably the most traumatic part, is getting her to realize that I had made that decision. And sorry.
No, that's
it. It impacted our entire family, our way of life, and it wasn't easy. But like I said, I had the time to mentally prepare for it, and that gave me that huge leap forward on the individual that may have a traumatic amputation. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I was going to re-engage as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, I had some medical setbacks with some infections and things like that. And you always hear about the story that, the guy gets his leg amputated one week and next week he finishes the Boston Marathon. That's awesome. That's awesome. Good on him, dude. Good on him. But I'm going to tell you straight up, that is not really the way it happens. 99% of the time, that 1 percentile that is a freak of nature that can go and get right back on things, that is fantastic. But, being in Walter Reed, here I am. First of all, I get up to Walter Reed and I'm on crutches, no leg on the right side. I'm walking down this long hallway to the amputee ward, and it's this huge wall of windows. And it was kind of like a zoo almost. These people would walk up and they'd look in at these young men and women trying to rehabilitate and have their wounds mended. And people would stand out there and watch these guys, to say, well, it did two things. It did them a great deal of good to see these young men and women really trying to overcome the obstacles of their quote unquote physical limitations. And it gave them a greater appreciation for being an American and what their sacrifice did for them. Well, they would have stars, Oprah, rock stars, everybody came in and tried to cheer the guys up. But when I went down that hallway on crutches, here I am, already a Master Chief, in the Navy. I'm in an Army hospital, and I walk down and I look at these kids, and I had already had 26 years in the Navy, so I had the right to call them kids. And here they are, 18, 19, 20 years old, and I'm like, oh my God, I almost said it out loud. I said, Will, you do not deserve to be here. I thought my injury was so negligible, comparatively speaking, to these other kids, that I'm like, dude, you do not belong to be amongst these guys. And I said, okay, I got to do it. So I walked in the door, and a couple of guys walked up to me and said, oh yeah, hey, I've seen you around here. Who are you? Well, I'm Master Chief Wilson. I said, well, hey, come on over and meet the guys. And it was, within a day, it was just a big happy family, and they were just in there rocking and rolling, pumping each other up, trying to be the best that they could be. And that was day one.
Yeah, I think that camaraderie that comes with it. But one of the biggest things, and I could tell that it was one of the really emotional parts of the journey. And I think that this kind of goes to how we met. And also part of the projects that we're working on was the impact that it had on your family. And I think, that we, sometimes don't understand. And by we, I mean people that haven't served in the military or had a family member that has served in the military, that it's not just physical injuries. There's also emotional injuries whenever people come home from the military, and everyone responds differently. So can you share with us really what, going through that with your family, but then also how right now you're working to continue to support. I know you talk to guys on a regular basis, helping make sure that they have the support that they need, and that we're going to be working together with Project Second Chance. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that means to you and why that's so important?
Oh, absolutely. If you have an overt physical injury, an amputation, loss of a limb, something like that, people can see that from a distance. They're like, oh, this guy got hurt, probably in the military, so on and so forth. I would always have a Navy sticker on my residual or on my prosthetic, so people kind of knew right away. They said, okay, yeah, he was hurt in the military. But it's the unseen injuries of war that are often the most traumatic. And these young men and women come back from serving their country. They've seen their friends end in the most horrific of methods, and it's really amazing how cruel one man can be to another in time of war. And until you see it, until you're there, you never know. And one of our founding fathers, Thomas Paine, and I paraphrase, once said, to those who have fought and died for it, freedom has a taste and smell the protected will never know. And that's very true, because it is a unique brotherhood and sisterhood. But the emotional trauma associated with a physical injury sometimes is so overwhelming that that's what brings that young man or woman down. I've lost way too many friends due to the emotional trauma of war. I've got a bracelet right here from a buddy of mine. There were 4 of us that hung out in Walter Reed. A command sergeant major who was a E9. We were the 2 senior members. And then there was an Army sniper and an Army medic, both who had horrific head injuries. And, so we kind of hung together and went out to hockey games, and, the Vietnam vets would come in, and those who were able, they would take us out to dinners on Friday nights. And that's the incredible thing. The Vietnam vets were probably the biggest help to us that we could ask for. They were a blessing in disguise, because they told us, as we would sit down, they would get up and say, listen, you're here for a reason. Okay, you are the 3% that chose to raise your right hand to defend this nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You did your job great, but we will never let happen to you what happened to us. And that's a huge statement for these guys who came back and literally their nation disowned them. And yet they had to suffer with those wounds of war internally, and they could not externalize. They couldn't share it with anybody. Nobody wanted to hear their story, until, 2-3 decades later, people wised up and said, hey, these guys sacrificed themselves for us. but the way the media and the way the nation and the world viewed that conflict and war, it made them the bad guys. So, these young men and women that carry the emotional trauma, they need every bit of emotional support that we as a society can give them. And that's where groups like Operation Second Chance come in. It was started by a lady, had a couple of brothers in the military. Her name is Cindy McGrew. She's up in the DC area. And she just started collecting money and then going out and buying gifts, or toiletries, and coming in to Walter Reed and just being a compassionate human being and saying, listen, this is for you, use it. If you can't use it, give it to somebody who can. And this is just my way of giving back. And, she's gone through the emotional trauma of losing siblings in conflict. And then I remember when I was a patient at Walter Reed, it was Christmas time. So Cindy had gone out, taken her own money and gone out to buy Christmas gifts for guys in a couple of the different wards. And as she was going back to her car, she was held up at gunpoint and robbed. And so these guys took everything that she had, and now she suffered emotional trauma. Here she was held at gunpoint, trying to do a good thing. And so that set her back a long way. And then once we found out about that, of course, we wanted to go out and look for these guys, a bunch of one-legged guys hopping around looking for bad guys. But she's one of us, and we had to counsel her through the trauma of being, robbed and being held at gunpoint and, having the fear of losing her life. She now had a greater understanding for what we went through because she went through it herself. But that never stopped her. She went right back out, got gifts, brought them to the guys, and just carried on like a trooper, like nothing ever happened. But of course, when she gets home, of course, she just breaks down. And, that's where it's our responsibility to reach out and to uplift those fellow soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardmen, Coast Guard, whatever they are. They're all brothers and sisters, regardless of service. And don't get me wrong, there is huge inter-service rivalry. Marines, they're this, the Army, those guys. Navy squids, they don't do anything, but and we can talk to each other about that, and we can razz each other about that. But let somebody outside the military service do that, it's on, dude, because we've got each other's back, and that's the way it should be. You know, we're brothers and sisters to the end because we've been there and we've done that. And we can talk about each other, but nobody else.
Yeah, it's kind of like family.
It is, very much so. One huge big family, as dysfunctional as can be.
Hey, that's most good families are a little dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest things, and I'll be very vulnerable and kind of share that I had no military exposure prior to coming to 1 Mile, which is an organization that we're a part of. And it's really grown my ability to connect with you guys and hear your stories and understand really a deeper meaning underneath it. Obviously, I've always respected our military men and women, but I really didn't understand what that meant and how to support them or reaching out and why that was important or staying involved in their stories. And you said 3% of people serve in the military. So there's 97% of us here that, probably over half of those don't have anyone close to them, maybe more than that, don't have anyone close to them that they've ever been exposed to in the military. What do you really think some of the best ways that people can get involved, hear these stories, help, and really internalize a major part of our country and really help support our veterans?
There are a lot, that's a great question. And, there are a lot of civic organizations out there. There's American Vets, AMVETS, there's, just tons of military support organizations, VFW, you name it. The biggest thing that the Joe American can do. If he or she sees a man or woman walking down the street with a military ball cap on or a military t-shirt, the best thing that they can do is reach their hand out and say thanks, you know, because that means more than you could possibly know. You know, just to be thanked for the service and sacrifice. I mean, you know, we went in, we didn't do it for the paycheck. Believe me, we didn't do it for the paycheck, or else nobody would serve. But you know, we all came in from different socioeconomic levels, all different levels of education. You know, you may be with a guy from the inner city, next to a guy from the farmlands of Kentucky, next to a surfer from California, next to you know, whatever. But you've all got to learn how to mesh together. And, you know, that diversity really brings the team together, because each person is able to bring their aspect of life into the team and say, well, you know, you think you've got it bad. Well, listen to what happened to me when I was a kid. And, you know, this is what we did in this situation. And believe me, in combat, if I ever had a city kid, or in training even, let's say, okay, for example, I was a what they call a SEER instructor, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, which is prisoner of war survival, up in the state of Maine. So we would get all these high risk of capture personnel come in there for training: SEALs, Green Berets, pilots, you know, you name it, anybody who stood a high risk of capture. And we would run them through a survival phase, and then eventually they would get into a POW situation. And it was to train them and to remove the fear of the unknown, to have them experience something like that preceding their introduction into a wartime scenario. Well, anytime I would get these guys up there, I would ask, okay, where are you from? We would know it ahead of time anyway. Where are you from? Where are you from? And if I found, you know, as I alluded to, that country boy from Alabama, and then I got this city kid who's never seen grass in his life, all he's seen is the concrete walkways of New York City. You know, you know, here he is in the woods of Maine. He's like, oh, dude, what have I gotten myself into? I would, you know, naturally, I would pair them up. I would go, okay, I get this country boy over here, I get this city slicker over here, and I'd pair them up. Because what that city kid can learn from that kid from the country is leaps and bounds beyond what we can teach them as an academic situation. They can show them, okay, this is how we hunted turkey. This is how we hunted deer. All right. The same applies to hunting humans. All right. And the same survival aspects come into play. So, you know, like I said, you know, the biggest thing and the simplest thing that our American populace can do is just, you know, reach out and say thank you to a veteran. I mean, it will mean more to them than you will ever know. Believe me.
I appreciate that so much. I think it just helps to know. I think sometimes too, we just feel like, oh, we shouldn't do that, you know, or, oh, that's awkward. And so I think it's super helpful to know from someone that, no, that means a lot. You should take that next step and really do that and dive in. And you just don't know where you're going to find people on a day. And you could really be the thing that lifts them up that day and reminds them that they're meant to be here. They were meant to serve. They did something great. And a lot of our military men and women really need that on a regular basis. So
absolutely, you know, a thank you goes a long way. Take it in the normal workplace. You know, you work your backside off on a project. It's nice to get a pat on the back, you know, and say, hey, great job. Same here. We did our job. It's nice to get that pat on the back and say, hey, good job, thanks. It's the same thing, you know, and I get that it's awkward, and I get the fact that, you know, people who haven't served are hesitant to approach someone like that that has been in the military. But, you know, we wouldn't wear a military ball cap, we wouldn't wear a military t-shirt if we weren't proud of the service that we had given to our nation.
Love that.
So, you know, it's all good. It's all good.
Love it. in June, so in about a year, June 2021. Oh my gosh, we are gonna throw down on an amazing adventure, race across America. You have been on this adventure before. Tell me what the heck we're getting into, and really, what is this race about? We've got a stunner team. What is this race about for you? And then what is it about just in general? Give us a little rundown.
Well, everybody enters RAM or RAW. RAM, Race Across America, or RAW, Race Across the West. RAW, initially, we did in 2016 with one of our Wounded Warriors. And it was the hottest year in history for the race. And RAW, Race Across the West, goes from Oceanside, California to Durango Springs, Colorado. And we had to, our rider had to drop out, and in the 85 percentile of riders dropped out that year just because of heat injuries. So it was a very lean year. But then he trained, our rider trained and trained and trained, and came back in 2017. And as a solo rider, rode 3,070 miles in 11 days from Oceanside, California to Annapolis, Maryland, just because he could. Now, let me back up a minute. This young man was in the Navy, and he was going to BUDS, which is basic underwater demolition SEAL training. He had already passed the infamous Hell Week. He was just about to graduate. Well, what people don't know is when you're going to BUDS, the weekends, unless you have duty, you get to go home. So he was going home to his apartment on a Friday evening, in the greatest shape of his life. Here he is, getting ready to be pinned as a Navy SEAL, and a drunk driver in San Diego came on the expressway the wrong way and hit him head on at a combined speed of about 120 miles an hour. Well, Joe didn't fare very well. He suffered, intracranial traumatic brain injury, 2 compound fractures on each leg, punctured lung, lacerated liver, ruptured spleen, bruised heart, compound fractures in his arms. And he had to recover from that. And less than 10 years, more like 5 years from being incapacitated to that point, he did Race Across America, just to prove to himself, a lot of times, if you're seriously injured, coming back is not to prove that, oh, look how macho, look what I can do. For me, for guys like Joe, it was, I need to do this. I need to do something to prove to myself that I'm still that same guy that they rolled into the OR. I'm still me. I'm still the same guy who, led physical training throughout my career, who, did this, did that, and led from the front. When you're injured, a couple of things happen. Number one, you sustain the physical injury. Then you sustain the psychological injury. Then you sustain the loss of identity. Here I was, here he was, he was a petty officer. Here I was a master chief. I carried on. At the 26-year mark, I got hurt. I ended up doing 32 years. I stayed on as an amputee, which in past conflicts you weren't able to do. But due to technology, we have these high-speed, low-drag carbon fiber this, carbon fiber that. I went in with 1.5 legs. I came out with 8. I looked like a spider. I had legs, No, I'd leave them laying in the living room. My wife would trip over them. Really, can't you put your legs away? Who deals with that? But the big thing is to prove to yourself that I've still got it in me to do it. And people enter RAM and people enter RAW for all different reasons. To prove that they can beat the time, to prove that they can do it. The reasons are vast and varied, but for us, entering Team 1 Mile Project into it, won my leadership project, it's a different thing. And we decided to get an 8-rider team, mixed both male and female, just stud athletes, to get out there and crush this thing in an effort to bring the light onto injured veterans. And moreover, those who suffer in silence. Those injured veterans who, to look at them, you would think there's nothing wrong with them. But they go home and they're shattered. They are absolutely shattered human beings. And something like this, having a group of individuals from vast and varied backgrounds come together for a common cause with their care in mind, that's huge. That's that thank you, amplified a million times. Now we're bringing it into the forefront of the media. We're bringing the entire nation in. This is why we're doing this. We're not doing it for us. They say at the crew chief meeting, one of the brief points is they go, listen, we are going to be straight up with you. We are not sure which is the toughest part of RAM, riding it or crewing it. And we're like, what do you mean riding or crewing? Well, we're sitting in a van, what's so bad about that? And this guy's riding 3,000 miles, on 5 hours sleep. And believe me, once you do it, you understand. Because as a crew, it's paramount. I mean, you're doing 1,000 different things to support this one rider. Now we're bringing 8 riders in. That compounds at 8 different times. You have, all these ancillary things to think about to make sure that that rider has nutrition, that rider has a spare bike. If that rider has a flat tire, somebody's getting out there to change it. If that rider, gets sick on the road, if that rider, needs a water bottle pass, you don't stop to eat. You hand a water bottle out the car door and they keep on going. So the time off the bike is negligible at best. The time on the bike for us is dual purpose now. It's not only giving us a chance to, establish ourselves as a top level competitive team going after the record maybe, but it also gives us the chance to put light on these young men and women who have, as the 3% of the American populace, raised their right hand and chose to protect this nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that's what it's all about. And, this is huge. Mike Campbell, he contacted me out of the blue and said, hey, Will, would you like to do RAM? He had no idea that I had already done it before. And I'm like, absolutely. Yeah, I did it back in 2017. He's like, what? I go, yeah. I was on a crew for 2017 RAM. He's like, oh, that's awesome. So, the little bit of knowledge that I can bring to the race, and Ben, one of our other riders, an attorney, he has ridden RAM before and is in one of the highest time ratings for a 2-man team for the race across America. That corporate knowledge, you can't buy that stuff because teams are very exclusive and very reclusive about sharing information with other teams because they don't want to give away their trade secret, So a lot of teams have to do it on their own. Luckily enough, we are close enough, Ben and I, with other riders, that they are helping us and sharing little tidbits of information to make our team that much better. But having these athletes just volunteer to say, yes, I want to do this, knowing why they're doing it, that's huge. That goes way beyond the expenditure of calories and riding up and down the mountains. You got to realize you're leaving California, you're crossing the Rockies, you're going across the Great Plains, you're up in the Appalachians, the Great Smoky Mountains. You're riding along a flatland and then you see these mountains, you're like, oh my God, I've got to climb those now, and so it's incredibly challenging. I mean, they call it the toughest bike race in the world for a reason, and one of their monikers on their T-shirts, one of their advertising things, it says, this ain't no tour. And they want to make sure that people know this is not Tour de France. We don't have 3 rest days in between stages. This is 3,000 miles of back-breaking pedaling going across the United States as fast as you possibly can. And with us, we had that dual fold of doing it for ourselves, but moreover, doing it for the military community.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. And I think, honestly, talking about this is a great summation of everything that we've talked about, because Race Across America for us is methodical. It's having the same setup over and over and over and over and over again for 3,000 miles to eventually meet a success point whenever we get across. And it's taking everything that's thrown at you and throwing back the methods and just tweaking them a little bit. And I really think that that's what we were talking about for life. And then it's using this athletic platform that we have and the community that we have to fuel a purpose. And when you move through life with a consistent plan and a purpose, you will be unstoppable. Whoever is listening to this, whether it's athletes, business people, wherever you're at, if you can get those 2 things and work towards those constantly, you'll be an unstoppable force. And I think that that's really too what we want to give back. And the people that we've invited on the team and the people we've invited to be part of 1 Mile, and as we add more events in the future, is we want to give back anyone that's lost that little bit of purpose. Okay, like, let's see if we can find that. Or maybe they've lost that little bit of consistency. Let's see if we can train through and give back that sense of consistency, that sense of drive in your life. And I just think it's going to be huge. I'm so honored to be a part of this team. I can't wait till everyone gets to watch our travels. Those of you guys, we are announcing June this year is going to be a big launch so that you guys can see all the members of our team. And then you guys will see stuff trickle out. So make sure that you follow the 1 Mile Leadership Project. We are on Facebook and Instagram. So I will tag in the show notes here. Master Chief, where can people find and follow you, learn more about your story, and connect with you?
Hey, they can go on Facebook, look up Will Wilson. I'm the only one-legged guy standing next to a president, shaking hands. My profile picture, I was fortunate enough to go out to President Bush's ranch and work with him on his project, which he holds every year, which is called the Bush 100. He invites injured soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine guardsmen out to his ranch to do a 100K mountain bike ride every year. And believe me, President Bush is a stud mountain bike rider. I just want to put that out there. This guy, he crushes your soul on the trails. Believe me, it's amazing. You look at the guy, you're like, oh, okay. Trying to keep up, Mr. President. No, it's the other way around. But just go on Facebook. I've got a lot of posts out there. The one thing I always close my posts with, if I write anybody, it's a simple statement: never, never, never give up, especially on yourself.
I love that. I know too, for anyone that knows any military veterans or even active military people that are struggling right now, Will is always willing to talk and reach out. He's an excellent resource, having come up through the military, dealt with injuries, family person, so also dealt with that side. So please don't hesitate to reach out to him, ask questions. If you know somebody that he should connect with, please reach out to him. That's really what this project and our mission is all about. So use him as a resource. We are excited to share his story today. And we end every Mobility Athletes podcast the same way, which that is to remember that today your best is enough. Thank you, guys.